Welcome to the Centerpoint Podcast, where nursing and law unite. Welcome to Centerpoint Podcast, where nursing and law unite. I am Jackie, the owner of Centerpoint Consulting, and I assist attorneys with healthcare-related cases. And today, I have the privilege of speaking with Joseph Discepola, who is one of my clients. And Joseph and I have a great history together. So, legal nurses, this little input is for you. If you think that your marketing efforts are failing, here is proof to just keep on going. So I had visited some websites and I came across Joseph's website. He is the owner of JPD Injury Law. And when I saw his website, I knew I wanted to work with him. I just had it in my heart that this guy, he's going to be great. He's the one I want to work with. And so I kept sending him little cards and notes for about 2 years and no response. Crickets. Never heard a word. And then one day in 2021, I was actually pulling into my parents' garage. My dad had just died about 40 minutes earlier. And as I pulled into their driveway, my phone rang and it was Joseph. He said, "Jackie, this is Joseph. And you have been sending me cards and I would like to work with you. I have a case." And I was floored, but it was the best thing that could have happened to me at that moment. It was the worst day of my life, and yet a total feeling of elation hearing him speak with me. And so I just nonchalantly said, "It's great to hear from you. Would it be okay if we spoke tomorrow? My dad just died." And he said, "Well, absolutely." And so with that background, I want Joseph to have a moment to speak with you and just give you his remembrance of that first day that we met. Joseph?
Sure. I was just playing hard to get, Jackie. It was one of those things where I had worked at 3 different firms for about 4 years each, starting off my legal career. Got to the point where I felt confident that I could handle all cases by myself. I'd been doing that for a number of years. And so we had an in-house nurse consultant at my old firm. And going forward, I relied on him to an extent for help as I started my practice. But he couldn't really dedicate much time. So I needed somebody that I can trust, that I could rely on. And I had remembered that you had, sent these very nice personal notes in the mail. And so there was a point where I was like, well, I really need to find a person I could work with exclusively that I get to know and trust that does good work. And that's why I kept your card and information. That's why I reached out to you. And obviously my timing was pretty bad, unknowingly that I called you when your father had passed. I thought that spoke a lot of you and your professionalism. You still took the call, and even in that situation. But I've had a pleasure working with you, as my exclusive nurse consultant ever since.
Joseph, I just remember that because of that traumatic experience, I think you and I just bonded even faster than we normally would have, because it was one of those catastrophic moments in life where you also gave me encouraging words, and it just really opened up great dialogue between us. So nurses, if you're out there wondering if it's possible to get to the point where you have really good connections with attorneys that you're hoping will become your clients, it's there. It can happen. This relationship right here is proof of it. But I really also wanted to bring Joseph on board to talk about his firm and what he does and what brought him into the profession he's in right now. So Joseph, tell us a little bit about your background, why you do what you do.
Sure. The job of Santa Claus was already taken. I was not good enough to be a professional athlete. And so I studied finance and accounting in undergrad. And that was actually my initial career. I went to NYU and their Stern Business School, and I studied finance, CPA accounting. I had job offers with some of the big accounting firms. Ultimately, I chose a job with Goldman Sachs as a financial analyst in their controllers division, which was really like internal, like audit and accounting, specifically with the foreign exchange desk. But I quickly realized it wasn't something that I was really passionate about. I had taken 2 business law classes in college. I had taken some sort of business law class in high school. And I was always struggling. I'm really good at math, but I also really like this idea of justice and critical thinking, protecting people, doing the right thing. And so I was contemplating going to law school straight after undergrad, but I had been in school since I was in preschool. So I wanted to get some work experience, really see whether I would be happy with finance and accounting. And ultimately, I took the leap of faith and said, this is really not for me, and applied to law schools. I was encouraged to go to University of Miami because I had two friends that were a few years older who had gone and loved it. And so I did a JD MBA program there. And my idea was that I was going to go into some sort of business law, commercial litigation, corporate law, something with my business background. And I fell into personal injury because my first year I listened to a speaker who opened up his own practice straight out of law school, gentleman Spencer Ehrenfeld. So I thought it was kind of interesting. There was like a blend of medicine and law, and he had different types of cases. And so his presentation was interesting. And since it was right before spring break and I wasn't going anywhere, I asked if I could shadow him for a day. And he agreed. So I went to work with him for a day just to kind of see what it was about. And I found it very fascinating because there's all different issues. There's there's all sorts of injuries that people could sustain in all different ways. He had a case against Ford. He had a slip, trip, and fall case. He had all these different things going on. And I'm like, wow, this isn't just like boring. And I actually like the fact that you can help people and you weren't billing for your time. Your incentives are aligned with your client, which I think is great because almost in every area of law, they charge for the hour. So the longer your conflict goes on, the more money the lawyers make. So ideally, they would like to resolve your conflict as soon as possible if it doesn't benefit the lawyer or the law firm financially doing that. But in my practice area, personal injury, it's contingency-based. And with a contingency-based fee agreement, the more money you get for your client, the more money you make. So your incentives are directly aligned. You both are in it together, working together to get a fair, just outcome. So I really like the fact that it was personal, interests were aligned. I don't have to worry about every minute of every day being billed, being paid for it. And I do find I'm always learning new things. There's engineering principles, whether it's accident reconstruction, a defective product, even causation of a car accident. You have different types of areas of medicine, especially in the medical malpractice context or nursing home context, which is a lot of things that you and I have worked on together to find the right experts. These cases have merit. So I like that I get to pick and choose my clients. I like that it has the flexibility to have your own practice in personal injury versus working at a big corporate firm. But that's initially what sparked my interest, was that one presentation. And then there was a job offer for personal injury litigation as like a part-time, one day a week clerk at a firm in Fort Lauderdale. And I wanted some litigation experience, and I had been interested in personal injury as a result of the year prior. And so I got hired to be the law clerk. And I did that for 2 years every Friday in Fort Lauderdale, and I was hired full-time by that gentleman and worked for him for 4 years, another firm back in Miami for 4 years, back in Fort Lauderdale for 4 years, and now I've been on my own for almost 4 years. So it's been an interesting journey. I've sampled different areas of law. I represented foster kids my first summer. I clerked for a criminal court judge. I worked in the tax department, Burger King Corporation for a summer. And then I worked in doing some family law, criminal law, real estate law, some commercial law up in New Jersey my last summer, since it was a 4-year JD MBA program. And ultimately, I just like personal injury the best. It just resonated with me the most, and I've been very happy with that.
So, Joseph, you have such a great background, and that I think can speak to those that are even looking to go into law, not just legal nurses or other attorneys that might be listening, but your journey is a great one for those looking to go into the career of law, knowing that, wow, there's a vast choice of different things to go into, and you have touched on a lot of them. And so with the background that you've had, for those that might not know that are listening, can you describe the difference between, we hear a lot, people talk about personal injury attorneys and medical malpractice attorneys, or PI cases and med mal cases. For those that might not know, describe for us what the difference is.
Sure. It's actually a distinction that it's always bothered me. A medical malpractice case is a personal injury case, right? At the old firm I worked at, they're like, oh, PI cases versus, like, they are all negligence cases. It's just the difference in Florida, at least, is that there's a separate set of statutes that make it much more difficult to sue doctors, nurses, and hospitals, right? But at the end of the day, someone acted negligently. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. They owed a duty of care, and they caused harm to somebody, right? And so it's the same concept, except that there's a different set of statutes that say Well, you can't sue a doctor, a nurse, or a hospital right away. You have to hire an expert in that same field of medicine. They have to evaluate the records, and they have to sign an affidavit finding that there was a deviation in the standard of care. That's the term of art for basically saying a doctor, nurse was hospital or employee was negligent, and that negligent caused harm to somebody. So you have to then do a 90-day pre-suit investigation process, which will toll the statute of limitations, which historically was shorter. You used to have negligence cases could have a 4-year statute of limitations in Florida, where medical malpractice was 2 years, so half the time. And then it became no more than 4 years. Sometimes things are, let's say there was a failure to diagnose cancer, you found out 3 years later, oh my God, you'd still be within the statute of limitations because you didn't realize it within 4 years. But anyway, so there's stricter requirements. Now it's 2-year statute of limitations across the board for all negligence cases in Florida, which just changed last year. But the difference is that very few firms want to do medical malpractice cases because they're much harder to prove. They're more expensive. They're complicated, right? You have all these very well-educated doctors that specialize in their field. And as a lawyer, you're never going to be able to compete with a doctor. You get superficial knowledge. You could really study the case, talk to your experts. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult to challenge these experts. You need your experts to challenge those experts. And so it's tough because historically, I believe the statistic is, at least in Florida, 80% or more of the verdicts are in favor of the defendant doctors, nurses, and hospitals. So you have an uphill battle. It is expensive, it's technical, it's challenging. And so very few personal injury firms do it. Medical malpractice firms, they do get referrals from other personal injury firms, right? People will market for all these types of cases and then farm it out. And, I've been fortunate that people that are other personal injury firms that get a lot of cases will ask me to review cases for them because they don't want to deal with the medical malpractice cases. And it's much easier, more profitable, and takes less work to handle a rear-end auto accident case or a slip and fall case. You typically don't need experts in those cases, so it's a lot cheaper as a law firm to not have to finance the costs of a medical malpractice case versus an auto case or a premises liability case. So the differences are most firms don't do the med mal case, and there are some firms that focus primarily on that because that's their niche, and they have in-house doctors and nurses basically doing what you do, Jackie. They spend a lot in overhead to have these full-time employees just review tons of cases that come in. And that's, in part what I try to do with your help a lot of times. If I'll screen a case, and if it sounds like it might be a case to me, I send it to you and say, hey, Jackie, this seems like it's something. And you'll either let me know if it is or it isn't. And it's very worthwhile for me to have your opinion because it's very important to not take bad cases. You'll spend a lot of time and money on a bad case, and then you're never, as a law firm, you're going to have unrealistic expectations for your clients thinking, oh, you're taking it, something positive is going to come of it. But it's a waste of time and money if there's no insurance, if there is no survivor in a wrongful death case.
So, Joseph, I know that you do a lot of med mal cases. And so talk to me about that process. I know that you do have referrals that come in from law firms. So speak to us a little bit about how that works and then the screening and when you bring in a legal nurse consultant such as myself.
Sure. So there are many, I would say 95% of the cases that come across my desk are not cases that work. They're not viable for a number of reasons. One is there's not a valid claim of negligence or causation. Sometimes it's a public hospital or entity with their sovereign immunity for $200,000. That's never going to make sense for a medical malpractice case because the costs in themselves could be minimum $50,000 upwards of $100,000 plus. And with the 40% fee, and if there's hospital bills and liens, the client's not going to recover anything. So in order to have a financially viable case, I have to be able to look at it. Is there going to be enough coverage that we could recover? The damages are significant enough. So at the end of the day, after fees and costs, I'm able to obtain compensation for the client. There may not be medical malpractice insurance. There may not be a survivor if it's a wrongful death case. In Florida, if you don't have a surviving spouse and you don't have children under 25 and you die, there's really no damages for a survivor. And you would have to look at funeral bills, medical expenses, which we get paid back through the estate, but not to the family members. So there's things that don't work. And so what typically happens is a lot of these personal injury firms will, or it could be a different type of law firm or family friend, former client that says, hey, so-and-so was in the hospital. They almost died. This is what happened. They want to sue. They want to know if they have a case. So I'll schedule an appointment to talk to them, and I will screen the case. First, I got to make sure it's within the statute of limitations. I get calls like, 5 years ago, this thing happened. It's like, well, I can't help you even if you had the clearest case of liability. Too much time has passed. It could be that I had an infection. I almost died. They didn't take good care of me. Well, how are you doing now? Well, I'm totally fine now, but I almost died. It's not a case. Or the damages aren't sufficient. Like I get sometimes referrals for dental malpractice cases. Like, I need 2 implants now. I spent $6,000. Now I need 2 implants, and I want to sue this dentist. And it's just like the cost of hiring an expert in and of itself to review this case and with my attorneys is going to far exceed the damages. If your damages are just the having to hire a new dentist to redo the 2 implants, it doesn't make sense. There's sometimes people just have bad luck and bad outcomes. With surgery, oftentimes there's risks. There's just people, everyone's different. You have different genetics, your overall health, high blood pressure, diabetes, you're a smoker. All these things affect how you heal, and there are inherent risks of infection, even mortality. And so when sometimes you have a bad outcome, it doesn't mean that there was bad medicine. The doctor's procedure could have been totally normal and fine, but sometimes there's a risk and there's nothing you can really do to avoid it. And so I have to reject those cases. Sometimes it seems like there's something great and still you have to hire an expert, or let's say an orthopedic doctor. I had a case recently where they screened it and they say, look, it's just not, it's just a bad outcome. Doctor, there's nothing wrong necessarily with the way they did the surgery, just a really, really bad complication, but that's known. So that's also part of the reason a lot of firms don't want to get involved, because they'll be spending $5,000 to $10,000 just to screen a case that could be a no, right? It could be just a turn down. So that's the calculus, is just you have to screen it for merit, statute of limitations. Do you have the right coverage, damages? What's the ultimate injury involved, and the amount of damages that might make sense to pursue? So those are the things I have to look at, and I have to be very real with these potential clients about whether I could help them. And like at the end of the day, it's my opinion. It's not the gospel. And I always encourage people to get a second or third opinion, because people may see things differently. They may have a different expert that sees the case differently, but that's ultimately what it is. And most people are appreciative of my time because I'm not charging for the consultation. I'm speaking to them, just to see if I'm able to help them.
So, Joseph, you did touch on some very important points there that not everyone's aware of, and that is the high cost of having a medical malpractice case and what it takes to actually ensure that you have a good case before you move forward with it. So you talked a little bit there about using experts to help screen your cases. At what point, I know when you use me, but tell others when you bring in a legal nurse consultant.
Sure. It's not just the med mal cases, also nursing home negligence cases. When I have a client or a family member who would be the client, they have power of attorney over an elderly, demented relative, or they're going to be the surviving child and personal representative of the estate. When I take the history and do the consultation, if I find that something to me seems like this is negligence, with enough experience in handling different types of cases, like nursing home, you have bed sore cases that should usually almost always preventable, repeated falls with head trauma that they're not sending out for MRI to detect brain bleeds, if there's a change in their neurological conditions, things like that, or there's some sort of neglect. When that hits me, I'm like, this sounds bad, and this person died. Then I'm like, all right, well, I need Jackie to evaluate this to let me know if my suspicions are correct or if they're not. Right? Like you're able to go through the chart, and I know you have a team, and together you all will look at and say, these are all the things that they did wrong, or we looked through everything and it's just this person was old and failure to thrive, and it's just unfortunate. And that's also part of the issue, is a lot of clients just have a hard time accepting that their loved ones are failing and will eventually die. So it's kind of striking the balance between how much of the issue is that they're upset that their loved one failed and they're looking to blame someone, or is there actually someone to blame for what happened because they were entrusting this nursing home with their loved one's care and well-being, and they didn't, fulfill their duty. So that's, for me, something has to strike a chord within me that with a presentation initially, when I'll request records. That's the other thing, is I have to then send a notice letter to these nursing homes or the doctors to provide the records, so I could start looking through them myself. Is there something that speaks to me that went wrong here? And then I try not to spend a crazy amount of time myself because I'm not the expert. I'm the lawyer. So then that's when I'll say, okay, I thought I saw some things in here that don't seem right. Let me send this out to Jackie.
So, what would you say to attorneys that do med mal cases that have not yet used a legal nurse to help screen their cases? So you've had help. You said when you worked in-house where you've used nurses in the past, and now you use me. I know that I've spoken to some attorneys that hands down always have a legal nurse help them. And I've spoken to other attorneys who say they'll never do it. So what's your thought on that? What would you say?
It's really tough for me because I'm not aware of med mal lawyers that don't have people screening cases for them. At the old firm, we had the in-house nurse, and there was another doctor that they ran a ton of cases by. So they it's hard for a lawyer to unless they were a doctor at some point, to think that they know as much as a nurse or a doctor, even if you've been practicing for a long time, just because we don't have that clinical experience. You could read books all you want, but we don't have the experience to truly sift through in a way that would qualify us to say yes or no. I mean, some things are glaring, and then you say, okay, I have an orthopedic expert I've used a bunch of times, and maybe just go straight to them. But if you have some sort of decent volume of medical malpractice inquiries and you're not using anybody, I don't even know how you would do that. I don't know how you would. Because at some point, at least in Florida, the law requires you to hire an expert to review the records and give an opinion and then put it in pre-suit. So I don't even know. You don't have to do that with nursing home cases. And some people maybe they're cheap and they just feel like they'll get some sort of pre-suit settlement and not really work the case up and know what the true strengths and weaknesses are. But I think it's extremely cost effective and valuable to hire an expert nurse to look at nursing home cases and even screen medical malpractice cases for review, because first of all, nurses are less expensive than a medical doctor, right? These doctors charge $1,000 to $2,000, $2,500 an hour, sometimes more. And nurses, it's a more cost-effective way just to know, like, hey, do we have a leg to stand on? And I think nurses are more accessible than these other doctors that are practicing. So for me, it makes sense. It's more efficient, it's more economical. And so I would encourage people, if you're not using anyone to screen, then you're probably not allocating your time effectively towards working on your cases for all the legal aspects of it and trying to put on your nurse/doctor hat and kind of outside your element to an extent.
So I think that you clarified, Joseph, what I didn't there, and that is screening prior to bringing in an expert. So, there are attorneys definitely, obviously, for med mal cases that will go straight to an expert. And that's what you just touched on, how it can be less expensive if you have a screening done prior to bringing in that expert right away, if you don't know that there's necessarily a viable case there. And I think I could have worded that a little bit better to make that clear, but you closed the circle there for me on it. What would you say to legal nurses that might be listening to this that are trying to get clients and trying to get the attention of attorneys and are having a tough time doing so? For nurses, a lot of them, the hardest thing for them is getting themselves out there and marketing. So what would you say from an attorney's point of view on how to do that, or what words of wisdom would you give them?
It's a matter of how do you capture someone's attention, right? If you're a stranger. And I think you took a more personal, unique approach by sending a letter or a card in the mail versus I get countless emails every week, people soliciting, oh, you need to a legal assistant, you need a medical record. Like, I don't know who these people are. I'm like dealing with other lawyers, client emails, stuff from the court. Like, I don't have time to go through that in the batch of my email. So picking up the phone, mailing something, even a sample of work product, and protecting the person's name, but like, hey, I'm a legal nurse, here's my rate sheet, this is a sample report I do, picking up the phone, trying to actually get someone's attention. Like, email is a very impersonal, lazy way of doing stuff. It's effective if you know the person and you're exchanging stuff, but when you're a stranger trying to establish a business relationship, a cold email is not effective to me. And if you're just one name in a sea of names, you have to stand out. And I think it's by showing to me, showing a sample of work product is very, very important, because just to say, hey, I'll review your case. It's like, okay, now I'm hiring you. It's like, well, what am I getting here? Like, I don't, I want to know in advance. It's like, okay, this is what it's going to cost me, and this is the type of thing I could look forward to and expect. This is it. This is valuable to me. So I would try to approach people personally, directly, and give them something that's tangible for them to kind of sink their teeth into, to know, you do quality work.
That's great advice, Joseph. And for anyone who is watching, this is attorney Joseph Discepola with JPD Injury Law. He owns his own law firm. He has an office in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And if someone had a case and they wanted to contact you to potentially be their attorney, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Just call my office, 844-573-4529. And, I return calls usually the same day, unless you call like after hours, and I'll call you the next day. But yeah, just reach out to me and call me, and if I'm busy at the moment, I'll call you back. We'll schedule an appointment, and we'll talk to see if you have a case that we can pursue. And
I can tell you, having worked with Joseph for over 2 years now, he is very personable. He tells it like it is. And for those cases that he works them hard, and he's a good advocate. I always told him that if I had a case myself in Florida, I would want him to be my attorney, because I know how hard he fights for his clients. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for us, Joseph?
I'm going to echo the words of my old middle school principal, Bill Galatro, and that is to do the right thing. I think that serves you well in whether it's your personal life, professional life. Just try to do the right thing. You'll make mistakes, but as long as your intention is there and consistently try to do what's right, I think people will appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for being on this podcast, and I am wishing you all well. And this podcast comes out once a month. For more updates on legal nurse consulting and great interviews with attorneys, come back to this station. See you next time.
Take care.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.